Murder at the Santa Training School. Welcome back to Mindful Musings, where stories unfold like winter frost on window panes, delicate and revealing. I'm your host William, and today I'm sharing a tale that chills more than December winds. As snow began to dust the village of St. Mary Mead, an unusual enterprise took root, a Santa Training School that would transform jolly aspirants into professional Father Christmases. But beneath the tinsel and forced cheer lurked something sinister. Through the keen eyes of Miss Jane Marple, we'll discover how the spirit of giving became the instrument of taking, and how white gloves meant to spread joy became vessels of vengeance. Settle in, dear listeners, as we unwrap Murder at the Santa Training School. Chapter 1. The Arrival of Christmas Cheer. The first Monday of December brought an unusual bustle to St. Mary Mead. Miss Jane Marple, observing from her cottage window, watched as 5 strangers converged upon the village hall, each pulling wheeled suitcases and carrying garment bags. The morning frost hadn't yet melted from the hedgerows when Gerald Blackwood's distinctive voice boomed across the green. "Punctuality is the first virtue of a professional Santa," he declared, standing at the hall's entrance in a perfectly pressed suit, his silver beard meticulously groomed. "Those who arrive late to Christmas disappoint children." Miss Marple had known of Blackwood's reputation for 30 years. He'd played Father Christmas at Harrods, entertained at royal charity events, and trained countless department store Santas. His professional Santa training school had come to St. Mary Mead at the vicar's invitation, promising to transform ordinary people into believable embodiments of Christmas magic. The 5 students filing past Blackwood represented various walks of life. Dorothy Mills, a woman in her 60s with gentle features, clutched her handbag nervously. Thomas Reed, middle-aged with thinning hair, attempted a jovial smile that didn't reach his eyes. Harold Price moved with scientific precision, adjusting his wire-rimmed spectacles. Sarah Fletcher, young and earnest, carried a notebook already opened for notes. Marcus Webb, a heavy-set man whose natural build seemed suited for the role, walked slowly, almost reluctantly. "Welcome to your transformation," Blackwood announced once they'd assembled inside. "Over 5 days, I will either make you into proper Santas or expose you as unworthy pretenders. There is no middle ground." Miss Marple, who'd volunteered to help with tea service during the sessions, noticed how Blackwood's tone shifted from public warmth to private steel. She poured Earl Grey while observing the master instructor's methods. "Mrs. Mills," Blackwood said during the first costume fitting, "your natural appearance suggests grandmother, not Father Christmas. Children seek magic, not reminders of mortality." Dorothy's cheeks flushed crimson as she adjusted the practice beard. "Mr. Reed, that laugh sounds like you're choking on Brussels sprouts. Again." Thomas attempted his ho-ho-ho repeatedly, while other students watched uncomfortably. "Miss Fletcher, your smile appears painted on. Children detect falseness instinctively. They'll know you're performing, not believing." Sarah's expression crumbled slightly before she forced another smile. "Mr. Price, those eyes, dead as last year's Christmas tree. Where's your spark?" Harold remained expressionless, absorbing the criticism. "And Mr. Webb," Blackwood circled the large man like a predator, "you're the wrong sort of fat. Disease, not jolliness. Children will fear rather than embrace you." Marcus's hands trembled as he adjusted his practice belt. Miss Marple served biscuits, noting how each student's enthusiasm dimmed under Blackwood's relentless critique. The village hall, decorated with garlands and lights for the season, felt increasingly oppressive. "Excellence demands discomfort," Blackwood proclaimed. "If you cannot endure 5 days of proper training, how will you manage hours of children pulling your beard, questioning your authenticity, testing your patience?" The first day ended with assignments: perfect the laugh, practice the walk, memorize children's common requests, study the psychology of belief. Each student left carrying thick manuals Blackwood had authored, their faces showing strain rather than seasonal joy. Miss Marple remained behind, helping clear teacups. "Quite demanding standards," she ventured to Blackwood. "Mediocrity dressed in red suits traumatizes children," he replied curtly. "I create professionals, not amateurs playing dress-up." That evening, Miss Marple encountered Thomas Reed at the village shop, purchasing throat lozenges. "Difficult first day?" she asked gently. "I've paid £500 to be humiliated," he said bitterly. But Blackwood's certification opens doors at major department stores. I need this work. Similar encounters throughout the village revealed each student's determination despite Blackwood's harsh methods. They'd invested money, time and hope into this program. 5 days seemed both endless and insufficient for transformation. As Monday ended, Miss Marple reflected on the peculiar cruelty of teaching joy through suffering, of building Christmas spirit by first demolishing self-worth. The village hall's lights glowed late as students practiced in private, their shadows moving like spectres against the windows, rehearsing happiness they didn't feel. Chapter 2, Behind the Red Curtain. Tuesday's session began with beard maintenance and costume care. Miss Marple arrived early with fresh supplies for tea service, finding Gerald Blackwood alone in the hall, meticulously arranging 5 Santa suits on mannequins. His attention to detail was obsessive, each button aligned perfectly, every fold precisely placed. "Appearance creates belief," he muttered, not acknowledging her presence. "Sloppy Santas destroy childhood." The students arrived looking exhausted. Dorothy Mills had clearly been crying, her makeup carefully reapplied, but unable to hide puffy eyes. Thomas Reed's voice was hoarse from practicing laughs. Harold Price carried a notebook filled with observations about optimal, jolly body language. Sarah Fletcher moved stiffly, having apparently practiced sitting poses for hours. Marcus Webb seemed smaller somehow, as if Blackwood's words had physically diminished him. "Today we address your individual failures," Blackwood announced. "Mrs. Mills, your age shows through every gesture. Children want immortal magic, not elderly fragility." He demonstrated exaggerated movements, mocking Dorothy's careful gait. "Reed, you've practiced wrong. Your laugh comes from the throat, not the belly. It sounds diseased." Thomas's attempts at correction only earned more ridicule. "Price, you're analysing rather than feeling. Children aren't equations to solve." Harold's scientific approach to perfecting Santa clearly irritated Blackwood. "Fletcher, that veterinary gentleness won't work. Children are wild creatures, not sick puppies." Sarah flinched at the reference to her profession. "Webb, you're sweating already. Imagine under hot lights with children climbing on you." Marcus wiped his brow, ashamed of his body's natural responses. Miss Marple distributed tea during the morning break, noticing hushed conversations among students. They were bonding through shared misery, exchanging glances of support when Blackwood wasn't watching. Dorothy comforted Sarah after particularly harsh criticism. Thomas offered Harold throat lozenges. Marcus shared his water bottle when others ran dry. "He's breaking us down," Harold observed quietly to Thomas. "Classic psychological manipulation. Destroy self-worth, then rebuild according to his template." "Except there's no rebuilding," Thomas replied. "Just more breaking." The afternoon brought child interaction simulations, where students took turns playing Santa while others acted as difficult children. Blackwood's commentary was relentless. "Mills, you're coddling. Fletcher, you're frightened. Reed, you're trying too hard. Price, you're calculating responses. Webb, you're practically catatonic." During tea service, Miss Marple overheard Blackwood taking a phone call in the supply room. "The fee is non-refundable," he said coldly. "If they can't handle training, they certainly can't handle the job. Natural selection." She noticed Dorothy Mills in the corner, carefully applying hand cream to fingers raw from adjusting practice beards. The woman's garden centre business clearly kept her hands rough, but she was determined to soften them for children's sake. Thomas mentioned his tobacco shop was struggling, making this Santa certification essential for supplementary income. Harold's work at the chemical plant paid well, but he sought Santa work for personal fulfillment after a difficult year. Sarah wanted experience with children before, starting her own family. Marcus spoke least, but Miss Marple learned he'd lost his pharmacy technician position and needed seasonal work desperately. Each had reasons beyond money for enduring Blackwood's abuse. They sought transformation, redemption, or simply human connection through bringing joy to children. Blackwood seemed to recognize these deeper needs and exploited them mercilessly. "Vulnerability is weakness," he lectured. "Santas must be invulnerable symbols, not human beings with feelings." The day ended with students practicing alone in assigned sections of the hall. Dorothy worked on youthful movements that looked painfully forced. Thomas gargled salt water between laugh attempts. Harold studied child psychology texts. Sarah practiced in front of a mirror, searching for genuine smiles. Marcus sat still, staring at his reflection in the costume's brass buttons. Miss Marple tidied up, observing Blackwood lock his personal items in a private locker room adjacent to the main hall. He handled his white gloves with particular care, placing them in a sealed bag within the locker. "Pristine gloves are essential," he said, noticing her attention. "Dirty hands reveal dirty character." As Tuesday concluded, the students dispersed into the village night, each carrying the weight of inadequacy Blackwood had heaped upon them. Miss Marple watched them go, wondering how much criticism the human spirit could endure before breaking entirely. Chapter 3. The Chemistry of Cruelty. Wednesday brought practical demonstrations. Miss Marple arrived to find the hall transformed into a mock department store Santa's grotto, complete with throne-like chair, artificial snow, and wrapped empty boxes as props. Gerald Blackwood stood beside the setup like a theatre director preparing for opening night. "Today you perform," he announced as students assembled. "Full costume, full character, full scrutiny." The students had brought their assigned Santa suits, professionally cleaned and pressed. Miss Marple noticed each handle their costume differently. Dorothy with reverence, Thomas with resignation, Harold with clinical interest, Sarah with nervous energy, Marcus with visible dread. "Webb first," Blackwood commanded. "Show us your interpretation." Marcus struggled into the suit, the padding adding to his natural bulk. His hands shook as he donned the white gloves, carefully preserved in individual plastic sleeves. He settled into the chair, attempting a benevolent expression. "Ho, ho, ho," he tried, the sound hollow. "Pathetic," Blackwood circled him. "You look diseased, sound depressed, and radiate discomfort. Children would run screaming." Marcus's face crumpled slightly. Sarah Fletcher stepped forward. "Perhaps if we offered support rather than—" "Miss Fletcher, when you've played Santa professionally for 3 decades, your opinion might matter. Until then, silence." Sarah retreated, but Miss Marple noticed her exchange glances with Harold Price, who was taking detailed notes about everyone's performances and Blackwood's critiques. Dorothy's turn came next. Despite Blackwood's cutting remarks about her grandmother energy, she managed warmth that seemed genuine. Her voice cracked during the third "ho ho ho," earning Blackwood's derision. "Emotional weakness," he declared. "Santas don't cry, Mrs. Mills." "I wasn't crying," Dorothy protested softly. "My throat is simply—" "Excuses are for failures." Thomas Reed followed, his performance mechanical from over-rehearsal. Harold Price approached the role analytically, having clearly studied videos of professional Santas, but lacking spontaneity. Sarah Fletcher's attempt showed promise until Blackwood noted her veterinary habit of speaking to children as if they were nervous animals. During tea break, Miss Marple overheard fragments of conversation. The students were discussing their various areas of expertise, finding common ground in technical knowledge. "DMSO is remarkable for transdermal delivery," Harold mentioned to Marcus. "We use it industrially, but I know pharmacy applications exist." "Veterinary medicine too," Sarah added, "helps medications absorb through skin." "Dangerous if mishandled," Marcus replied quietly. "Can carry any dissolved substance directly into the bloodstream." Dorothy and Thomas discussed nicotine-based pesticides, comparing notes on concentrated formulas used in their respective businesses. "The pure alkaloid is lethal," Dorothy said. "We keep it locked away at the garden centre." "Same at the tobacco shop," Thomas agreed. "Historical displays of pure nicotine extraction. Fascinating but deadly." Miss Marple found these technical discussions interesting, particularly how each student possessed specialized knowledge despite their diverse backgrounds. Blackwood, overhearing, sneered, "Planning to poison disappointing children? Focus on performance, not chemistry." The afternoon brought stress testing, Blackwood's term for psychological endurance trials. Each student endured increasingly difficult scenarios while maintaining character. Blackwood played various difficult children, drunk parents, and skeptical older kids, pushing each Santa to breaking point. Marcus Webb broke first, removing his beard mid-scenario. "I can't," he gasped. "I can't pretend joy when you're destroying." "Then leave," Blackwood said coldly. "Refunds aren't available for quitters." Marcus stayed, resuming his position with visible effort. Miss Marple noticed Blackwood's white gloves throughout the session, pristine, perfectly fitted, never removed even during demonstrations. He was particular about them, adjusting fingers frequently, smoothing wrinkles obsessively. Professional appearance begins with immaculate hands, he lectured. These gloves cost £200, custom made, properly fitted, cleaned specially. Harold Price asked about cleaning methods, genuinely interested in the technical aspects. Professional dry cleaning only, Blackwood replied, though I treat them myself between sessions. Trade secrets. The day's final exercise required students to work together, creating a Santa chorus line performing synchronized movements. Their coordination was terrible, but Miss Marple noticed genuine camaraderie developing. They helped each other with costume adjustments, whispered encouragement, and covered for mistakes. Blackwood watched with disgust. Teamwork is weakness. Professional Santas work alone, compete for jobs, maintain individual excellence. As Wednesday ended, students lingered in the hall, reluctant to separate. Their shared suffering had created unexpected bonds. Dorothy helped Marcus with breathing exercises. Thomas and Harold compared notes on performance techniques. Sarah offered everyone homemade cookies she'd brought, trying to inject actual Christmas spirit into the oppressive atmosphere. Blackwood locked his equipment away, particularly careful with his gloves, placing them in what appeared to be an airtight container within his locker. Tomorrow we discuss the psychology of maintaining character under pressure, he announced. Be prepared for uncomfortable truths about yourselves. The students dispersed slowly. Miss Marple noticed Marcus Webb remained behind briefly, staring at the mock grotto with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, somewhere between longing and despair. Chapter 4. Secrets Beneath the Beard. Thursday morning arrived grey and cold. Miss Marple entered the hall to find Gerald Blackwood rearranging furniture for psychological evaluation sessions, individual chairs facing his position like an interrogation setup. The cheerful Christmas decorations seemed to mock the clinical arrangement. The students arrived subdued, their fourth day of training having worn down initial enthusiasm completely. Dorothy Mills moved stiffly, her arthritis aggravated by repeated costume changes. Thomas Reed sucked throat lozenges constantly. Harold Price had dark circles under his eyes from late-night study. Sarah Fletcher's notebook was now filled with crossed-out attempts at perfecting her technique. Marcus Webb seemed to have retreated entirely into himself. Today, we examine why you've each failed to embody true Santa spirit, Blackwood announced. Individual consultations will reveal your core deficiencies. He called Dorothy first. The others could hear his voice through the thin partition he'd erected. Mrs. Mills, you're here because you're lonely. Your garden centre provides plants, not human connection. You think being Santa will fill that void, but emptiness can't give joy. Dorothy emerged 15 minutes later, tears streaming down her face. Thomas went next. Mr. Reed, your tobacco shop is failing because you lack charisma. You can't sell pleasure to adults, so you think children will be easier marks. But children sense desperation. Thomas returned white-faced, hands trembling. Harold's session was briefer but cutting. Mr. Price, you analyze because you can't feel. Whatever happened in your personal life has left you emotionally dead. Dead men can't play Santa. Harold emerged stone-faced, but Miss Marple noticed his notebook pages crumpled in his fist. Sarah's consultation produced muffled sobbing. Miss Fletcher, you work with animals because humans reject you. Your fake smiles fool no one. Children need authenticity, not veterinary bedside manner. She returned, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Marcus's session lasted longest. Blackwood's voice carried despite the partition. Mr. Webb, you're the most pathetic. You think playing Santa will restore something you've lost, but you're fundamentally broken. Your wife and daughter's deaths left you hollow. You'll contaminate Christmas with your grief, spread sadness instead of joy. You should quit now. Accept you're too damaged for this role. When Marcus emerged, his face was alabaster white, eyes unfocused. Sarah reached for his arm, but he pulled away, walking mechanically to his chair. Miss Marple served tea in absolute silence. The students sat separately, each processing their psychological decimation. She noticed Harold Price discreetly checking his phone, researching something intently. His expression shifted from curiosity to interest to something darker. "Tomorrow is graduation," Blackwood announced, oblivious to or enjoying the devastation he'd caused. 4 hours of final evaluation. Those who pass receive certification. Those who fail have wasted their money and time. He explained the ceremony format: full costume performance, certificate presentation, and professional photography for successful candidates' portfolios. Each Santa would demonstrate their skills before local dignitaries the vicar had invited. "Tonight, prepare yourselves. Lock your costumes in the designated storage area. Arrive by 7 a.m. for final preparations. The ceremony begins at 9 a.m. sharp." As students prepared to leave, Blackwood added one final instruction: "Leave your practice gloves in your lockers. Tomorrow you'll wear new ones, my gift to graduates. They're waiting in sealed packages in the changing room." Miss Marple helped clear away tea things, observing each student's departure. Dorothy walked with newfound determination despite her tears. Thomas muttered to himself, possibly practicing or possibly cursing. Harold moved purposefully, his scientific mind clearly working on something. Sarah seemed protective of Marcus, walking beside him, though he didn't acknowledge her presence. Marcus stopped at the door, turning back to look at Blackwood. "You're wrong about me," he said quietly. "Am I?" Blackwood smirked. "Prove it tomorrow." After the students left, Miss Marple lingered, watching Blackwood meticulously prepare for the next day. He handled the new white gloves with particular care, examining each pair before placing them in labelled bags. "Such attention to detail," she observed. "Details matter, Miss Marple. The difference between amateur and professional lies in minutiae others overlook." That evening, Miss Marple encountered several students around the village. Harold Price at the pharmacy, purchasing various items. Sarah Fletcher at the library, researching something on the computer. Dorothy Mills walking near the hall, peering through windows. Thomas Reed at the pub, drinking alone. Marcus Webb she found sitting on a bench near the church, staring at nothing. "Mr. Webb?" she ventured gently. "He's right," Marcus said hollowly. "I am broken, but broken things can still serve purposes." "What purpose might that be?" Marcus looked at her with eyes that held depths of pain. "Justice, perhaps, or teaching final lessons." He rose and walked away before she could respond, leaving Miss Marple deeply troubled as Thursday ended with secrets stirring beneath the surface of St. Mary Mead's forced Christmas cheer. Chapter 5. The Final Morning. Friday, December 6th, dawned crisp and bright. Miss Marple arrived at the village hall at 8:30 a.m. to help with graduation ceremony preparations. The hall had been transformed overnight. Rows of chairs for guests, an elevated platform with 5 Santa thrones, and a table displaying certificates in gold frames. The morning light through the windows caught the artificial snow, creating an illusion of winter magic. Gerald Blackwood stood at the platform's centre, already dressed in his Master Santa costume, a superior version of what the students wore with real fur trim and genuine leather boots. His white gloves were pristine, catching the light as he gestured to arriving dignitaries. The vicar had assembled an impressive audience: the mayor, several town councillors, representatives from local charities, and photographers from the parish newsletter. They settled into seats expecting heartwarming Christmas entertainment. The students had arrived early as instructed. Miss Marple noticed them in the changing area, each handling their new white gloves with varying emotions. Dorothy Mills examined hers with appreciation for quality. Thomas Reed seemed indifferent. Harold Price inspected his with scientific interest. Sarah Fletcher appeared nervous about damaging them. Marcus Webb held his for a long moment before slowly pulling them on. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood announced at precisely 9 a.m., "welcome to the graduation ceremony of the Professional Santa Training School. These 5 individuals have endured rigorous training to earn the privilege of wearing the red suit professionally." Miss Marple noticed his use of endured rather than completed. Even now he couldn't resist diminishing their achievement. The ceremony began with each student demonstrating their skills. Dorothy went first. Her performance markedly improved from earlier days. She'd found a grandmotherly warmth that actually worked, despite Blackwood's criticisms. Thomas followed with a competent if uninspired presentation. Harold had refined his analytical approach into something resembling genuine engagement. Sarah's natural kindness shone through her nervousness. Marcus, despite everything, managed credible warmth, though Miss Marple detected profound sadness beneath his performance. Blackwood provided running commentary, unable to resist final criticisms even during what should have been a celebration. Notice Mrs. Mills still favours her arthritic hip. Mr. Reed's laugh remains slightly tubercular. Mr. Price calculates every gesture. Miss Fletcher's smile wavers under pressure. Mr. Webb perspires excessively. The audience shifted uncomfortably, sensing cruelty beneath the observations. The vicar frowned, apparently reconsidering his invitation to Blackwood. 2 hours into the ceremony, Blackwood began the certificate presentation. He stood at the podium, adjusting his white gloves repeatedly, a nervous habit Miss Marple had noticed throughout the week. His right hand seemed particularly active, fingers flexing inside the glove. "Before I present these certificates," he began, but his voice caught. He cleared his throat, pulled at his collar. He swayed slightly. Perspiration beaded on his forehead despite the hall's coolness. "Mr. Blackwood?" The vicar rose from his seat. Blackwood's right hand clutched the podium. His face had gone pale, then flushed, then pale again. His breathing became laboured. "I don't—" He collapsed forward, catching himself on the podium before sliding to the floor. Dr. Haydock, attending as a guest, rushed forward. The audience erupted in confusion. The 5 students stood frozen in their Santa costumes, watching their tormentor convulse on the platform. "Everyone back!" Dr. Haydock commanded, beginning examination. "Call an ambulance." Miss Marple moved closer, her keen eyes taking in every detail. Blackwood's right hand was clenched, the white glove darkened with perspiration. His pupils were constricted to pinpoints. A peculiar smell, almost like tobacco but more concentrated, emanated from him. "Poison," Dr. Haydock said quietly to the vicar. "Acute nicotine poisoning, if I'm not mistaken." The ambulance arrived within minutes, but Gerald Blackwood was pronounced dead at 11:47 a.m., his graduation ceremony becoming his final performance. Inspector Slack arrived shortly after, the hall becoming a crime scene rather than a celebration venue. The 5 students, still in their Santa costumes, were separated for questioning. The audience was dismissed after providing contact information. Miss Marple remained, observing as Inspector Slack examined the scene. She particularly noted when he bagged Blackwood's white gloves as evidence, the right one showing significant discoloration on the interior. "Absorbed through the skin," Dr. Haydock explained to the inspector. "The glove was treated with something. DMSO mixed with concentrated nicotine, I'd guess. It would take hours to fully absorb, causing gradual then acute poisoning." "Who had access to his gloves?" Inspector Slack asked. "They were new," Miss Marple offered, "given to the students this morning. But Mr. Blackwood's personal gloves were stored in his locker all week." The inspector's attention turned to the 5 students, each with motive, each having endured Blackwood's psychological torture, and each, remarkably, with access to the necessary compounds through their various professions. The morning that had begun with forced Christmas cheer had ended with death on the platform, 5 suspects in Santa suits, and Miss Marple's keen mind already working through the possibilities of who had transformed white gloves from symbols of purity into instruments of murder. Chapter 6. 5 Santas under suspicion. The village hall had been cordoned off as a crime scene. Inspector Slack established temporary interview rooms in the adjacent church vestry, where the 5 students waited in their Santa costumes, a surreal image of suspected murderers dressed as symbols of generosity and joy. Miss Marple, having volunteered to assist with tea service during interviews, positioned herself where she could observe everything. Inspector Slack began with Dorothy Mills, whose garden centre background immediately raised flags. "Mrs. Mills, you have access to nicotine-based pesticides," he stated directly. "Every garden centre does," Dorothy replied, her grandmotherly demeanour intact despite the situation. "But I would never—" "Mr. Blackwood humiliated you repeatedly, called you too old, said you'd frighten children." Dorothy's composure cracked slightly. "He was cruel, yes, but I've endured worse in my 67 years. Words don't drive me to murder, Inspector." Thomas Reed's interview focused on his tobacco shop's inventory. "You have historical displays of pure nicotine extraction equipment," Inspector Slack noted. "Museum pieces," Thomas insisted, his voice still hoarse from the week's practice. And yes, I know the extraction process theoretically, but Inspector, if I wanted Blackwood dead, there are simpler methods than chemistry. Such as? Thomas fell silent, realizing he'd said too much. Harold Price's position as an industrial chemist made him the most obvious suspect. You have direct access to DMSO, the inspector stated. You understand transdermal delivery systems. I understand many things, Harold replied calmly, his analytical nature serving him well under interrogation. I also understand that my knowledge makes me too obvious a suspect. Would I really use a method that points directly to my expertise? Sometimes the obvious answer is correct. Sometimes, but not always. Sarah Fletcher's veterinary background provided different complications. DMSO is common in animal treatment, Inspector Slack observed. For joint problems and medication delivery, Sarah agreed, her usual nervousness replaced by professional confidence. But veterinary DMSO is carefully controlled. Every usage is logged. Logs can be falsified. They can. But mine weren't. Marcus Webb's interview was the longest. His pharmaceutical knowledge made him the most capable of creating the poison. You understand dosages, absorption rates, the precise chemistry needed, Inspector Slack pressed. Marcus sat silently for a moment, his bulk filling the Santa suit differently than it had that morning, deflated somehow. I understand many things, he finally said. I understand loss. I understand cruelty. I understand that Blackwood was a monster who destroyed spirits for sport. That sounds like motive. Everyone here had motive, Inspector. He gave us all reasons to hate him. Miss Marple served tea between interviews, noting each suspect's behaviour. Dorothy's hands trembled slightly but steadily, arthritis, not nerves. Thomas kept touching his throat, a habit from the week's vocal strain. Harold took notes even while being questioned, analysing his own interrogation. Sarah's veterinary training showed in how she remained calm under pressure. Marcus seemed almost peaceful, as if a weight had lifted. Inspector Slack gathered evidence from the locker room. Each student's assigned locker was searched, revealing nothing immediately incriminating. Blackwood's personal locker, however, contained multiple pairs of white gloves in various stages of use, all stored in sealed bags with dates labelled. He was meticulous, the inspector noted. Changed gloves daily, cleaned them specially. The poisoned pair was from today, Miss Marple observed, the new ones he gifted to graduates. But his pair was different, custom made, he said. Worth £200. Miss Marple examined the evidence bag containing the fatal gloves. The right glove showed clear discoloration inside, concentrated on palm and fingers, where perspiration would be heaviest during the 4-hour ceremony. Whoever did this understood both chemistry and physiology, she mused. They knew exactly where to apply the poison for maximum absorption. The inspector's investigation revealed that all 5 students had been in the hall after hours. Security footage showed each entering at different times over the past 2 days, though the camera angles didn't cover the locker room clearly. Any of them could have done it, Inspector Slack concluded, frustrated. They all had means, motive, and opportunity. Miss Marple studied the interview notes, looking for patterns. Each student had specialised knowledge that could contribute to murder, but only one had the complete skill set needed: understanding of chemistry, dosage calculation, and transdermal delivery systems. Inspector, she said quietly, perhaps we're approaching this wrong. Instead of who could have done it, we should ask who would have done it precisely this way. Meaning? The method chosen reveals the murderer's psychology. This wasn't a crime of passion, but careful planning. Someone who understood not just how to kill, but how to make Blackwood suffer gradually, publicly, during his moment of authority. As afternoon faded, the 5 suspects remained under suspicion, each Santa costume now seeming like a disguise hiding a potential killer. The investigation had reached an impasse. 5 people with everything needed for murder, but no clear evidence pointing to just one. Chapter 7. Unmasking Motivations. Saturday morning brought Inspector Slack back to St. Mary Mead with disturbing news. Miss Marple received him in her parlour, where he spread financial records across her tea table with barely contained frustration. Marcus Webb ordered unusual quantities of both DMSO and nicotine compounds 3 weeks ago, he announced. Claims they were for compounding prescriptions, but can't produce documentation. Interesting, Miss Marple murmured, though she seemed unsurprised. What else have you discovered? Dorothy Mills purchased concentrated nicotine pesticide just last month, enough to kill dozens of people. Says it was for a severe aphid infestation, but her garden centre records show no matching customer complaints. He continued through his findings. Thomas Reed had been researching nicotine extraction methods online, his browser history revealing detailed study of alkaloid concentration techniques. Harold Price had signed out DMSO from his laboratory multiple times recently, claiming experimental purposes but filing no reports. Sarah Fletcher's veterinary clinic records showed discrepancies in DMSO inventory that she couldn't adequately explain. They're all hiding something, the inspector said, exasperated. Perhaps, Miss Marple agreed, but hiding something doesn't always mean hiding murder. She'd spent the previous evening visiting each suspect, offering tea and sympathy while observing their states of mind. The visits had revealed layers beneath the investigation's surface. Dorothy Mills lived alone in a cottage filled with photographs of grandchildren who rarely visited. Blackwood was right about my loneliness, she'd admitted, but wrong about it making me worthless. I wanted to prove that grandmotherly love could be exactly what children need from Santa. Thomas Reed's failing tobacco shop represented 3 generations of family business. Everything I touch fails, he'd said bitterly. Blackwood just confirmed what I already knew. But I needed that certificate to work department stores this Christmas, to save the shop. Harold Price's analytical nature stemmed from personal tragedy. My wife left because I couldn't express emotions properly, he'd revealed. I thought playing Santa would teach me to feel again. Instead, Blackwood proved I'm as dead inside as she claimed. Sarah Fletcher's veterinary gentleness masked deep insecurity. I've always been better with animals than people, she'd confessed. Blackwood saw through my act immediately, but I wanted so badly to connect with children, to practice before having my own. Marcus Webb's visit had been most revealing. His flat was a shrine to his deceased wife and daughter, photographs everywhere, their rooms preserved exactly as they'd left them 3 years ago. They died driving home from a Christmas pantomime, he'd told Miss Marple. I thought becoming Santa might help me reclaim Christmas, find joy again. Instead, Blackwood told me I was too broken, that I'd contaminate children with my grief. His pharmacy training materials were still scattered across his desk, including detailed notes on transdermal delivery systems. You've been studying, Miss Marple observed. I study everything, Marcus replied. It's how I process the world now. Understanding mechanisms, reactions, cause and effect. It makes sense when nothing else does. Inspector Slack's investigation continued revealing troubling details. Blackwood had kept files on each student, psychological profiles he'd compiled through the week. The contents were devastating. Dorothy Mills, pathologically needy. Substitute teaching and garden centre suggest desperate need for validation. Exploit maternal insecurities. Thomas Reed, classic failure pattern. 3rd generation business declining under his management. Emphasize inherited incompetence. Harold Price, emotional autism spectrum. High functioning but interpersonally disabled. Use analytical nature against him. Sarah Fletcher, possible abuse history. Retreat to animals indicates human trauma. Probe for breaking points. Marcus Webb, complicated grief disorder. Stuck in bargaining phase. Dangerous if pushed toward acceptance. He wasn't just cruel, Inspector Slack said, reading the files. He was systematically destroying them. The question, Miss Marple said quietly, is whether he finally pushed someone too far. Further investigation revealed Blackwood had done this before. Previous students from other courses had lodged complaints. One had attempted suicide after his training. Another had required therapy. Several had abandoned their Santa aspirations entirely. He was a serial emotional abuser, the inspector concluded, who finally met someone willing to stop him, Miss Marple added. The evidence continued mounting against Marcus Webb. His pharmaceutical knowledge was most comprehensive, his access to materials easiest, his mental state most fragile. Yet something bothered Miss Marple about the obviousness of it all. "Inspector," she said, studying the discoloured glove again, "notice the precision of the poison application. This required not just knowledge but steady hands, clear thinking, careful planning." "Your point?" Could someone in Marcus Webb's emotional state, grieving, devastated by Blackwood's cruelty, maintain such precise control? The inspector considered this. Then who? Miss Marple studied the 5 suspects' photographs, arranged like a line of paper Santas. One face looked back with something she recognised, not the obvious pain of Marcus Webb, or the visible insecurities of the others, but something colder, more calculated, someone who understood that justice sometimes requires taking matters into one's own hands, she said quietly. Someone who decided Blackwood's cruelty had claimed enough victims. Chapter 8. The Chemistry of Justice. Sunday brought an unexpected development. Miss Marple was tending her garden when Florence announced a visitor, Harold Price, still looking exhausted but carrying a folder of papers with determined purpose. "I've been investigating Blackwood," he said without preamble, "using my analytical skills for something useful." He spread documents across Miss Marple's garden table, printed emails, testimonies from former students, medical records somehow obtained. 3 suicide attempts among his previous students, Harold reported clinically. 7 required psychiatric treatment. 15 filed formal complaints that were mysteriously withdrawn. He destroyed people professionally. "You've been thorough," Miss Marple observed, noting the obsessive detail in his research. "It's what I do. Analyse patterns, identify causation. Blackwood wasn't just cruel, he was methodical. He identified psychological vulnerabilities and exploited them systematically. Like he did with all of you." Harold's expression tightened. Marcus Webb is being blamed, but he's just the most obvious victim. His grief made him the perfect scapegoat. "You believe he's innocent?" "I believe we're all guilty of wanting Blackwood dead, but wanting and doing are different things." That afternoon, Inspector Slack called another group interview. The 5 suspects sat in the church vestry, their Santa costumes replaced with Sunday clothes that somehow made them look smaller, more vulnerable. "Mr. Webb," the inspector began, "the evidence against you is overwhelming. Your pharmaceutical orders, your knowledge of transdermal delivery, your emotional state." "I didn't kill him," Marcus said quietly, "though God knows I wanted to." "The DMSO and nicotine orders?" "I was researching. After Blackwood said I was too broken, I started studying poisons. It was therapeutic somehow, understanding how things kill. But I never acted on it." Sarah Fletcher interrupted. "Inspector, we all had access to these materials. My veterinary supplies included DMSO. I could have taken it without anyone noticing." "My garden centre stocks are poorly monitored," Dorothy added. "Anyone could have taken nicotine pesticide." "The historical display in my shop includes pure nicotine samples," Thomas offered. "The case lock has been broken for years." "And I literally work with these chemicals daily," Harold said. "If we're confessing access, we all had it." Inspector Slack looked frustrated. "You're all protecting each other. You barely knew each other a week ago." "Trauma bonds people," Sarah said softly. "We survived Blackwood together." Miss Marple had been quietly observing, noting subtle dynamics. Harold's analytical nature extended to protecting others through logical arguments. Sarah's veterinary instincts made her protective of the wounded. Dorothy's maternal nature encompassed the entire group. Thomas's failure complex included failing to protect fellow sufferers. And Marcus seemed ready to accept punishment he didn't deserve, another form of self-destruction. "There's something else," Harold said, producing another document. "Blackwood's previous location had a suspicious death, a student who supposedly accidentally overdosed after training. The chemicals involved? DMSO and nicotine, though it was ruled accidental exposure in an industrial setting." The room went silent. "He'd been accused before?" Inspector Slack asked. "Never proven, but the pattern exists. Someone knew his history, knew what would point back to his past victims." Miss Marple spoke carefully. "The murderer chose this method specifically, not just to kill, but to send a message. This was about justice for all Blackwood's victims." "Vigilante justice is still murder," the inspector said. "Indeed, but it explains the psychology behind the crime." That evening, Miss Marple received another visitor, Marcus Webb, looking more composed than he had all week. "I need to tell someone," he said, "about that final session with Blackwood." He sat heavily in her parlour chair, his bulk seeming to overflow its boundaries. "He didn't just say I was broken. He said my wife and daughter were better off dead than living with someone as emotionally damaged as me. Said they probably drove into that truck deliberately to escape me. Miss Marple's hand went to her throat. Oh, my dear. I wanted to kill him in that moment. I had the knowledge, the materials, the opportunity. Everything points to me because I'm the perfect suspect. But I didn't do it. Why not? Marcus smiled sadly. Because my daughter loved Christmas. Killing Santa Claus, even a monster wearing the suit, would dishonor her memory. I couldn't corrupt what she loved most. After he left, Miss Marple sat in the gathering darkness, pieces of the puzzle shifting in her mind. The murderer had to be someone with complete knowledge, steady hands, and the psychological strength to plan and execute perfectly. Someone who could transform Blackwood's tools of power, his precious white gloves, into instruments of his destruction. The answer was there, hidden among the 5 suspects like a poisoned glove among pristine ones, waiting to be revealed. Chapter 9. The thread unravels. Monday morning brought resolution. Miss Marple had spent the night reviewing everything, interviews, evidence, behavioural patterns. She telephoned Inspector Slack early, requesting he gather all 5 suspects at the village hall where it had begun. The hall still bore remnants of Friday's tragedy. Chalk outlines, evidence markers, the platform where Blackwood had collapsed. The 5 suspects arrived separately, each looking worn from 3 days of suspicion. Miss Marple believes she's identified the murderer, Inspector Slack announced, his scepticism barely concealed. Miss Marple stood before them, her gentle demeanour belying sharp observation skills. This case puzzled me initially because you all had means, motive and opportunity. Each possessed specialised knowledge that could contribute to murder. But the method chosen, precise, calculated, symbolic, revealed the killer's identity. She moved toward the evidence table where the poisoned glove lay in its sealed bag. The poison was applied with scientific precision, concentrated on areas of maximum perspiration, avoiding the exterior where it might transfer. This required understanding of dermal absorption, chemical interaction, and human physiology. While several of you have pieces of this knowledge, only one has the complete picture. Her gaze moved across the 5 faces. Dorothy, your garden centre knowledge includes pesticides, but not the sophisticated chemistry of transdermal delivery. Thomas, you understand nicotine extraction but lack medical knowledge of absorption rates. Sarah, your veterinary training covers DMSO application but not human-specific dosaging. Harold, your chemical expertise is industrial, not pharmaceutical. She paused before Marcus Webb. Which brings us to you, Mr. Webb. Pharmaceutical training encompasses everything. Chemistry, dosaging, delivery systems, human physiology. Marcus remained still, accepting what seemed inevitable. But, Miss Marple continued, knowledge alone doesn't make a murderer. We must consider psychology. She returned to the centre of the room. This murder required emotional control that someone in Marcus's state couldn't maintain. Grief-stricken, suicidal ideation, devastating fresh wounds. Could such a person execute this precise plan? I think not. Inspector Slack leaned forward. Then who? Someone who could compartmentalize emotion from action. Someone trained to make life and death decisions without letting feelings interfere. Someone who had witnessed Blackwood's cruelty before and decided it must end. Her eyes fixed on Sarah Fletcher. A veterinary nurse makes such decisions daily, euthanizing suffering animals, maintaining composure during traumatic procedures, balancing compassion with necessity. Sarah had gone very still. You said something interesting during the investigation, Miss Fletcher. Trauma bonds people. But you weren't just bonded by shared trauma. You recognized Blackwood's pattern because you'd seen it before. Miss Marple produced a document Harold had uncovered. Sarah Fletcher, veterinary nurse. But before that, Sarah Mitchell, psychology student who dropped out after a traumatic incident. Your professor was accused of systematic psychological abuse of students. One classmate attempted suicide. You testified in the investigation, but charges were dropped. Sarah's composure finally cracked. Professor Hendricks. He was just like Blackwood, identifying vulnerabilities, exploiting them, destroying people for intellectual sport. You became a veterinary nurse to help creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. But when you saw Blackwood repeating the pattern, saw Marcus Webb pushed toward the same edge your classmate had reached. He would have killed Marcus, Sarah said quietly. Maybe not immediately, but eventually. Marcus was already researching poisons, not for murder but for suicide. I recognized the signs. So you acted. I had a choice. Watch another predator destroy vulnerable people or stop him. The psychology degree I never finished taught me one thing. Some personalities can't be reformed, only stopped. Inspector Slack stood. You're admitting to murder. Sarah looked at Marcus Webb, whose face showed dawning comprehension and horror. I'm admitting to preventing future tragedies. Blackwood had destroyed dozens of people. Former students, 3 suicides, 7 psychiatric hospitalizations, countless broken spirits. He would have continued. You could have reported him, the inspector said. Like I reported Professor Hendricks. Like others reported Blackwood. These men are clever, choosing victims who seem unstable, whose complaints sound like sour grapes. She turned to Dorothy, Thomas, Harold, and especially Marcus. You all would have been dismissed as bitter failures. Your testimony is worthless against his reputation. Meanwhile, he'd continue destroying others. So, you poisoned his glove, Miss Marple said, using your veterinary access to DMSO, nicotine from Dorothy's unsecured pesticide stock, and pharmaceutical knowledge from textbooks you'd studied while caring for Marcus, Sarah nodded. I spent 3 days watching him torture good people seeking redemption or purpose. When he told Marcus his family was better off dead, I decided Blackwood had issued his own death sentence. How did you access his locker? Inspector Slack asked. Thursday night. The lock was simple, and I had veterinary lockpicks for medicine cabinets. I treated just the right glove. Blackwood was right-handed, gestured constantly with it. The dose was calculated to build slowly during the ceremony, reaching fatal levels just as he stood in his moment of triumph. Poetic justice? Miss Marple asked. Practical justice. He died doing what he loved most, performing, being the centre of attention, displaying his authority. But this time, his performance ended permanently. The room fell silent. Dorothy Mills was crying silently. Thomas Reed stared at the floor. Harold Price took notes even now, analysing the confession. Marcus Webb looked at Sarah with a mixture of gratitude and horror. You saved my life, he whispered. You were worth saving, Sarah replied. Blackwood wasn't. Inspector Slack formally arrested Sarah Fletcher for the murder of Gerald Blackwood. She went quietly, her veterinary calm intact. As she passed Marcus, she pressed something into his hand, a small card with a phone number. My therapist from years ago. She specialises in complicated grief. You deserve healing, not the poison Blackwood fed you. Chapter 10. After the Snow Settles. 2 weeks after Sarah Fletcher's arrest, St. Mary Mead prepared for Christmas with subdued enthusiasm. The village hall had reopened, its association with tragedy gradually fading. Miss Marple sat in her parlour, knitting a complex pattern while reflecting on recent events. Inspector Slack visited one final time, bringing news of the legal proceedings. Sarah Fletcher has been charged with manslaughter rather than murder, he reported. Her barrister is arguing diminished responsibility due to psychological trauma from her past experiences. The jury will likely be sympathetic, given Blackwood's history. And the others? Recovering, each in their own way. Indeed, the 4 remaining students had taken different paths since the revelation. Dorothy Mills had started her own informal Santa training program at the Garden Centre, teaching local retirees to embody grandfatherly and grandmotherly Christmas figures. Her approach emphasised warmth over perfection, wisdom over performance. Children need authentic love, not manufactured magic, she told Miss Marple. Blackwood never understood that. Thomas Reed had abandoned his Santa aspirations, but found unexpected success turning his tobacco shop into a Christmas museum, displaying historical holiday traditions, including Victorian Christmas customs. The authenticity Blackwood had mocked became his strength. Harold Price had returned to his chemical work, but started volunteering at the local children's hospital, using his analytical nature to create precise, scientifically designed Christmas displays that fascinated young patients. He'd learned to express emotion through careful creativity. Marcus Webb's journey proved most remarkable. With therapy and support from the others, he'd begun processing his grief properly. He'd taken a position at a different pharmacy and, surprisingly, had donned the Santa suit for a local charity event. "My daughter would have wanted me to try," he'd explained to Miss Marple, tears streaming into his fake beard. "Not perfectly, not professionally, but with genuine intent to bring joy." The event had gone well. Children hadn't noticed his imperfections, only his genuine desire to make them smile. One little girl had even told him he reminded her of her grandfather, kind but sad, which somehow made him more real. Sarah Fletcher's veterinary clinic had been taken over by a colleague, but her impact remained. She'd prevented what everyone silently acknowledged would have been Marcus's eventual suicide. Her sacrifice had saved a life while taking another, a moral complexity that troubled the village's usual black-and-white view of justice. Miss Marple received a letter from Sarah, written from custody while awaiting trial. "Dear Miss Marple, I knew you would solve it. Your reputation preceded you, and I saw your keen observation throughout the week. I'm not sorry for stopping. Blackwood, only for the pain it caused innocent people. Veterinary medicine teaches us about quality of life versus quantity. Sometimes euthanasia is the kindest option for creatures that only spread suffering. Blackwood was such a creature, human in form but lacking humanity in spirit. I've enclosed something I found in Blackwood's effects, a list of future training locations. He planned to expand, to spread his particular brand of cruelty nationally. How many vulnerable people would he have destroyed? How many Marcus Webbs would have researched their own endings? I'll face justice for my actions, but I sleep peacefully knowing no more students will endure what we did, what others before us suffered. Sometimes protecting the innocent requires removing the guilty. Thank you for ensuring the truth emerged. The others deserve to know they weren't suspected, weren't blamed for wanting what I actually did. Respectfully, Sarah Fletcher." Miss Marple folded the letter carefully, placing it in her correspondence box. The moral complexity of the case would stay with her, a reminder that justice and law don't always align, that victims sometimes become vigilantes, that cruelty can breed its own destruction. The vicar visited that afternoon, still processing the tragedy that had unfolded in his village. "I invited Blackwood here," he said mournfully. "I brought this darkness to St. Mary Mead." "You brought someone you believed would spread Christmas joy," Miss Marple corrected gently. "His deception doesn't reflect on your intentions." "But Sarah Fletcher, she seemed so gentle, so kind." "She was both. That's what makes this case so troubling. Good people can do terrible things when pushed beyond endurance, when they see no other way to prevent greater suffering. Is that justification? No, merely observation. Human nature contains multitudes, kindness and cruelty, patience and breaking points, justice and revenge. Sarah Fletcher embodied all these contradictions." Christmas Eve arrived with gentle snowfall. The village held its traditional service, subdued but genuine. Marcus Webb attended, sitting in the back row, no longer hiding from the holiday that had taken his family. Dorothy Mills read a lesson about love transcending imperfection. Thomas Reed helped with decorations, his attention to historical detail creating authentic beauty. Harold Price had calculated the perfect acoustic placement for the choir. Sarah Fletcher's absence was felt but not mentioned. Her sacrifice, for that's how the 4 students privately viewed it, had freed them from Blackwood's shadow while casting its own. Miss Marple attended the service, observing how tragedy had paradoxically brought genuine Christmas spirit to St. Mary Mead. Not the manufactured joy Blackwood had taught, but real compassion born from shared suffering and survival. As bells rang midnight, she thought about the peculiar justice of it all. Blackwood had died wearing the white gloves he'd treasured, symbols of the purity he'd pretended while practicing cruelty. Sarah Fletcher had transformed those symbols into instruments of judgment, ensuring his final performance would be his last. The case would be debated in legal circles for years. Vigilante justice, diminished responsibility, the psychology of abuse and response. But in St. Mary Mead, as snow settled on the village, a quieter understanding prevailed. Sometimes those who teach others to embody generosity while practicing cruelty discover that their students learn different lessons than intended. Sarah Fletcher had learned that protecting the vulnerable sometimes requires removing predators. The other students had learned that surviving trauma together creates bonds stronger than shared success, and Miss Marple had learned once again that human nature's complexity defies simple categorization. In her knitting, drop stitches could be fixed, patterns could be perfect. In life, the threads tangled in ways that couldn't always be undone, only understood. As she walked home through the snowy streets, she passed the village hall where it had all begun. Someone had placed a small memorial there, not for Gerald Blackwood, but for all his victims, past and potential. A simple plaque reading, "For those who sought joy and found judgment, may they discover peace." It was, Miss Marple reflected, the most appropriate epitaph for a case where justice had worn a red suit and carried a poisoned glove, where mercy had taken the form of murder, and where the true spirit of Christmas had emerged not from professional training, but from protective love. The snow continued falling, covering the village in pristine white, hiding the darkness beneath while promising that spring would eventually come. Miss Marple returned to her cottage, her knitting waiting, the complex pattern ready for completion. Some mysteries she knew weren't meant to be solved, but simply witnessed, recorded, and remembered as cautionary tales about the price of cruelty and the cost of justice. And so ends the strange case of the Santa Training School, where those who came to learn joy learned instead about justice, and where the master who taught performance learned too late that some students take their final lessons very seriously indeed. Thank you for joining me today on Mindful Musings. I'm William, and I hope Miss Marple's keen observations have reminded you that beneath the festive surface, human nature remains endlessly complex. Until next time, may your mysteries be solvable and your Christmases free from cruel instructors in red suits.